Wilkes, Family Director of the Ian Mahar Center in the Weizmann School of Design, and a Senior Fellow with Data for Progress. His fellowship with Data for Progress has focused on the built environment impacts on climate change and resulted most prominently in the publication of low-carbon public housing policy briefs tied to the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act, introduced in 2019. His writing on climate, disaster, and design has also been published in The Guardian, The Atlantic, City Lab, Design Magazine, Houston Chronicle, Jacobin, Places Journals, and Science for the People magazine, and he's frequently asked to weigh in on the infrastructure and built environment implications on climate change, as well as candidate and congressional climate plans by major climate reporters and congressional staff. He worked as a landscape architect, city planner, organizer, and later in the Obama administration White House Domestic Policy Council. And he holds a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from the University of Arkansas, Master of Community and Regional Planning from the University of Texas, and a Doctorate of City and Regional Planning from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much, Billy. You want to say hi, even though you're in the very dark background? Thank you very much.
I'm trying not to wake my pets or my partner up, so I'll turn the lights on in just a second.
No problems. And we also have Jeannette Sordi. She's an architect and urban planner based in New York City. Until 2019, she was Associate Professor of Landscape and Urbanism at the Adolfo Ibáñez University in Santiago de Chile. She holds a PhD in Urban Planning and Design from the University of Genoa, and her PhD focused on the genealogy of landscape urbanism was published as Beyond Urbanism in 2014. She's part of the Landscape as Urbanism in the Americas initiatives since its beginning in the 2015 and co-organized conferences in Medellin, Santiago, Brasilia, Mexico, and Buenos Aires. Currently, she teaches at the New York Institute of Technology and is a consultant of the Inter-American Development Bank on projects in Uruguay and Argentina. Thank you very much, Jeannette. And finally, we have Ed, who is the academic leader of landscape at the University of Greenwich and a visiting professor at Politecnico di Milano. And in 2017, he was City of Vienna visiting professor, Urban Culture, Public Space, and the Future, Urban Equity and the Global Agenda at TU Vienna. He is the external examiner of this program. So here at the Architectural Association, and he completed a PhD in the cities program at the London School of Economics. He's initially trained in landscape architecture in Manchester, and then urban design in New York, I think under the guidance of Michael Sorkin. And Ed has written several books. Most recently, he co-edited with Tim Waterman Landscapes and Agency, Critical Essays in 2017, and he has just guest-edited an architectural design issue called The Landscapist that portrays some of the most relevant landscape practices of today. Is that right, Ed? Well, right.
Sorry, some of the most relevant, Alfredo. But yes, it's nice to join you guys. Nice to see you. I could probably shout out my window and you could hear me, but yeah, via online, it is what it is.
Good. And well, last but not least is Dubravka, who just joined us. She's a Serbian professor, author, and architect. And since 2016, she has taught at the Institute of Contemporary Art, which is part of the Graz University of Technology in Austria. She's known for writing about privatization and its consequences on Belgrade's urban planning, stating that the public space ought to be a resource whose development should bring equality, not the basis for profit-making. Her main field of research examines how modern cities change within the framework of spatial, legal, and economic modalities. And she is now moving to London, if I understand correctly, and will start teaching at RCA this very year. Thank you, Dubravka, for joining us.
Thank you, and sorry I was a little bit late.
Don't worry, we're just about to start. It took us a while. But yeah, now to the students, which is what we are here. And is the urban food team ready?
Oh, sorry, because her computer stuck. She just restart the computer and uploading to the OneDrive, but it still takes time.
Okay, well, let's start with away with the cars. Are you ready?
Yes, I can
Sure.
share the screen now.
Okay,
Right.
let's start. As I said, they will present in around 15 minutes, and then we'll give some time for a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm Yunting Wang, and my teammate is Ximing Chen. Our project is Away with the Cars. So how do people live in a car priority city? Let's move to one of the busiest streets, the Oxford Street in London. On the Oxford Street, the cyclists have to share space with cars and pedestrians. It's dangerous for all of them. And in outer London, we can see the on-street parking everywhere and also narrow pedestrians. By using these sections, we can conclude that the cars occupy lots of space and also influence the cyclists, public transport, and the pedestrians. So in another word, cars have already structured our cities for a long time, and many people began to have car-free aspirations. But it's not enough. So the Commonwealth introduced Away with Cars proposal. For us, we will add the proposal and our own view to create a children-friendly car-free city. So the first part is cars versus human. How cars structured our cities. From the global view, usually the area with high carbon emission is the place with high car ownership. And when we focus on UK, except the carbon emission, the car also developed the high fatality density, especially in big cities such as London. In London, we can see that cars influence road structure. We can see the broken cycleways, unconnected pedestrians, and low accessibility of green space here. So people began to have car-free movement. From the global view, the history of car-free movement is very long, and it usually happened in Europe and America. From the UK, the car-free policy mainly about car-free days and car-limited zone. And when we move to London, the mayor's transport strategy also introduced a lot, but it's not enough. When we apply this policy, from this section, we can see the car still in. So besides of that, there are still also many social injustice problems. The first one is it's children group injustice. Children have to suffer serious air pollution when they study at school, and the fatality density is also very high. Most students can't walk to school, even they are in the potential walking to school area because of the broken walkways. Next, please. The next one is low-income group injustice. Both inner London and outer London have low-income area. For the inner London, the public transport accessibility is usually high, so they don't need to buy a car, but they have to suffer serious air pollution. And the situation in outer London is opposite. So although people have better environment, they have to cost more on transport. Under the coronavirus situation, both inner London and outer London face the problem. Next, please. Problem. For the inner London, they usually have low death percentage and high public space accessibility. But the outer London faces the opposite situation. So we can find the relationship between public space and death percentage. The next one is no car group injustice. Let's move to the Southwark, which is in the center of London. 60% of Southwark households don't own a car, but 80% of Southwark Street have on-street parking, so that occupies a lot of space. Next is that's why we need our with cars proposal. Commonwealth hope to have a public-focused, multimodal, and zero-carbon environment, and change London into a private car-free zone by 2030. For us, we will choose walk, cycle, and bus to develop our design. With this with cut proposal, we can have a basic road sense from the activity space low to high. So we can see the bus priority road, cycle priority road, walk priority street, and play street. So we will have connective walkway and the cycle line and more green space. So the next.
Yes, I jumped to the next page. Can you see?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, it's stuck. So, and we treat children as the priority of car-free design. Yeah, we treat children as priority of car-free design. As children, it's one of the most vulnerable social groups. And when we focus on children, many other social groups can also get benefits. So next part will be our with cut design. First one is site choice analysis. We will choose Southwark as our first design for the test because Southwark has high public space and public transport situation, but there are still many problems here, just like the broken site and on-street. So then we begin to our analysis. The first one is land use analysis. For the land use analysis, we will have the area with more land use types is the area can be more suitable for our with cut development. Then it's school service area analysis. We analyze the distance to school. The area with short distance is a better place to develop. The next is social situation analysis. The area with low income is a place with worse situation. After we did the bus route analysis, we combine it with the super block structure, which is use the cycle line as a structure. So we can get the whole site structure here. And finally did site evaluation. And finally to choose the block with highest mark to continue our development, which is this site. To have a big view of the whole London, we also chose the Newham, which has the lowest public space, and as well as the Redbridge, which had highest death rate in coronavirus, to continue our design and begin the block theme analysis and design. First is public transport accessibility. Only the block in Southwark have better situation. The next is public space. For the block in Newham, we can see there are no green space here, and the activity space all belong to the parking area. So the next one is pavement width and death rate. In Redbridge, the pavement width, they all can't keep the social distance, which is very dangerous. Besides, because there are only one school in this area, so students have to gather in this school and have higher dangers. We also analyze the air pollution, which has highest pollution in Southwark block. By all of this analysis, we can have a whole view and did evaluation of these blocks. For the Southwark, the biggest problem here is air quality. So the theme here is green space. And for the Newham, the biggest problem is green area. So the theme is activity space. As for the Redbridge, the biggest problem is the pavement width. So we focus on children's safety and health on the street here.
Now we begin to show our design policy proposal from the Southwark. The plan is mainly to show how we construct block structure by following the block scheme. During the whole period, the London major strategy will keep implemented on the site. The road level diagram shows the basic situation to meet the requirement of various cars proposal, and the main issue analysis for each block to show how we solve issues step by step, based on the basic functions. Our design policy proposal will make targeted development to all roads, according to the different themes of the block. In Southwark, we will plan more street trees on green lines to purify the air and increase greenery coverage. After intervention, blocks can be completely away with private cars. Public transportation and electric vehicles will replace the private cars, and the pollution of blocks will be minimized by green lines increasing. Then we start to look at how these levels of road development can solve our problems. First is cycle priority green line. We look at East Street as example. Now, on-street parking has occupied 34%. Why is so low? Sorry. Now, on-street parking has occupied 34% of road space. Both temperatures and pollutions are high. After intervention, it doesn't affect the work of large cars, such as ambulance, garbage cars, and delivery trucks. It's a bit slow. And there will be wide cycle lanes for commuters quickly go through. Rain gardens and trees can reduce high temperature and CO2 emissions. So in 2030, we will have lower temperature with better air quality. Sorry, my computer is a bit starting. Then it's the play street development. We changed all parking bays to play street. In 2020, this is still a space surrounded by concrete. After our intervention, the parking bay will be transformed into green space. The walls will be covered with vines, and there are not only have amusement facilities, but also provide children with the opportunity to grow vegetables. And then is the walk priority. Now, on-street parking occupies most of the road space. After intervention, we will change road pavements. And speed-limited bicycles can still pass the walk priority road. The slow speed space will provide a safer environment for children's activity area on the one side. Then we will introduce the Newham development. In the previous analysis, the theme of Newham is the development of activity space. So in the plan, our priority is to develop the large activity space around schools, then develop the road around schools into a walk priority road, and transform the junction near the school into green spaces. And finally, we develop the roads in residential areas into cycle priority roads. The block will have a large range of activity spaces. We will see the activities street development. Now this street is used as a parking base. No one wants to park through the crowded vehicles. After the intervention, the road paving will be changed to a children's playground and also set up the exercise area for adults. Open vision can make adults pay attention to safety of the children. And finally, we also have a runway for exercise. Finally, we look at the rail bridge development. All streets here are less than 3 meters to keep social distance under COVID-19. The theme of this block is children safety development. In the plan, we analyze the routes for students go to school and set up children protection facilities on this road. The road around the campus and residential areas will develop into play streets for children to stay and play. We also will look at the section development. At the beginning, most of the narrow roads were occupied by on-street parking. We will develop children bicycle lanes and adult bicycle lanes, set up protection facilities in between to provide children with safer school environment. Based on our scheme development and road structure, The average temperature of Southwark will be reduced to 23 degrees Celsius. Average amount of CO2 emission can be lower than 10. And then for Newham, the block will increase 20% of activity space and 70% of green space. For Redbridge, all pavements are wider than 3 meters. Safety facilities there can protect children away with dangers. Finally, in 2030, the green space in the residential area will become a space for children to play, and the campus will provide a space for students to gathering and play. And that's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Jimin and Juntin. So now, well, if you they have any comments or questions, now it's the time. So anyone who wants to jump in is welcome.
May I ask you first something? So this is the final presentation before thesis. Like, at what stage are you in the process?
This is the final presentation before our final submission.
Okay, and that would be when?
October.
Okay, yes. Just to understand a little bit what's the process. I mean, this is like a dream, but I don't know, maybe if you could explain to us a little bit better. You saw some simulations at some point in the middle of your presentation. I think it would help a lot to understand what are the parameters on which you decide that this whole block can become pedestrian or can reduce car, because of course the question that everybody might have is like, how do we reach then everything we need to reach and everything that we were first using the car? So does it imply any improvement in public transport, or have you crossed parameters that let you define that actually there's no need within this area, like that's close enough to rely on pedestrian traffic? Or like, I would like to know a little bit more about that, if it's possible.
Well, yeah, actually, it's just a sense to explain the Orbit Cards proposal. We didn't think so much about how to get this object, but we just to show what it will look like if we really don't have private cars in the future. So just to give it to show it to give it a version. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because from the Mouritz car proposal, it's mentioned that before 2030, the city should be totally away with cars, and it also promotes a range of public transport and sharing cars, also the electric vehicles that can help people to get away with cars. So this, and also because we have studied the Barcelona superblock structure, and the road structure is mainly shows that the outbound of each block can be the public transport, and inside the block should be only the cyclists and pedestrians. So everyone lives in the block can walk within 200 meters to the nearest bus stations or the public transport routes. So that's the main idea for us to get away with the private vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's a great example, no? It's very clear that there is a grid, and every block, I think, is 130 meters wide. So you have 3 of them, and you're always within a relatively close distance.
Sorry, because we want to have a bigger vision of the whole London, but actually from the inner London and outer London, the social injustice issues are different. So we think that inner London and outer London, all of these blocks should have their own main issues. So we are trying to have the 3 different schemes in those 3 blocks development, so that we can targeted solve those issues. Not only away with the cars.
We just show the different. We show the 3 different problems in London, and which in different position, which from the inner London to outer London, 3 typical sites for the different situation. To deal with this different situation and social injustice problem, we have 3 different themes to develop it. So that's why we chose these 3 sites. It's according to our analysis in the London scale, just the layer on one page.
Yeah, because away with cars policy is just like to mention like a pedestrian utopians vision. But based on that, we want not only the city can be away with cars, but also our design policy proposal can solve the social injustice that we actually concerned in each blocks.
Can I
Yeah.
jump in with a sort of well, firstly, thank you for the presentation. I think that living in London, I'm aware that what you're proposing reflects many of the policies of the current mayor for London post COVID-19 lockdown, and there's neighbourhoods I'm aware of specifically close to where you're describing, where the road network has been temporarily closed in a pattern like you are proposing. And I think in a sense, I don't want to, let's say, critique directly your proposal, but I was wondering whether you could maybe comment on the issues of resistance to such a proposal. So I'm aware in London that there are a number of local groups who are claiming that the closing of streets to cars is an injustice to them. I think that there's an area of, let's say, public contestation in regard to how we communicate, how we develop, how we design such proposals. So I just wonder if you could maybe comment on, let's say, the counter arguments as well as the arguments. I think that many of us in the presentation agree with such a proposal, but I was wondering if you comment on the arguments on the other side.
Do you mean the main issues we concerned of each blocks?
Yeah, so there are concerns in London about restricting the movement of cars, and many local residents within these super blocks that you're showing us are actively organizing against the closure of these streets, and they are having community meetings claiming that the closure of these streets to cars is an injustice to them. So I know that you're describing other injustices around air pollution, but there's the perceived injustice of not being able to drive your car where you want to drive your car.
Yeah, well, about this question, I think it's treat something. If we treat cars like that, there's a justice. But if we treat pedestrian or cyclists like that, it's also the injustice. Yeah, so I think it depends on the rate or the percentage of different social group. I mean, I think the source from different social groups, this should be balanced. Because for now the road is developed for cars, not for human, not for pedestrian, not for cyclists. So yeah. I think it's the time to give this road. Maybe we can't totally achieve this goal because it's just a proposal. But I think we just need to think about what if we give some of this road back to pedestrian and cyclists. Maybe the whole road structure will be healthier, and there will be a better environment for all the social groups.
But I think what's interesting.
All those groups will get some. Yeah.
Sorry, am I muted or unmuted? Ed, hi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay,
I
fine.
can hear you.
I think what both Ed and Jeannette have brought to the conversation is really the power of architects, urbanists to not only visualize conditions, but also to identify through those so-called proposals, not a fix or a solution, but in fact, where some of the tricky business lies in terms of trying to find new paths forward in this thing called transitions to a decarbonized future. Now, I think, well done for coordinating your material and for doing quite a lot of detailed forensic investigation around this topic. I would encourage you, however, to take a step back, right, and actually see this not as a proposition, not as a proposal, but as a series of insights that you bring forward to those processes of decision making in cities. Now, if we look at the superblock in Barcelona, for instance, the reason why that came about, it wasn't a seamless, frictionless process. It came about because of active engagement, which was tricky, which took time, which actually brought many voices, many contestations on board through another platform, through the Decidim platform, which was an open source participatory deliberative democracy style way of actually bringing all of these conflicting parties together. The politics of space, justice and injustice was played out. So I think you're in an interesting point now, because you're not just giving a proposal of, a happy future where all the children are playing hopscotch and planting tomatoes on the street and everyone's got their fold-up bicycles. Okay, we get that, right? I think everyone's bought into that. But what are the issues which are preventing us to get to that end vision? And do we all ascribe to that? So I think look carefully at your material, try and understand and bring to whoever the policymakers are and whatever the policy making process is, what some of these tricky spatial and governance issues are, because I think that adds a very valuable contribution to the process of bringing change forward and bringing it fast. I think just one more point to make, what I thought was actually your most interesting point, and perhaps as a concept, was this notion of the broken walkway, right? This notion of broken cities, which is what COVID showed us. Circulation, mobility, access, all the rest of it, they're not separate systems, right? They are related. And I think we need to identify that perhaps accessibility to all the city's public goods requires us to think beyond just transport as a social justice issue, but justice in terms of proximity to work, availability of other public goods. So I would encourage you to look beyond just the broken pathways of the pedestrian or circulatory movement to see what other breakages are actually structural issues which are locking in many injustices we see, which are intersectional across. So I think that's my point, and I'm not going to repeat it to all the other students as well, but I think that's my sort of key point, is look at your material, your evidence, your design-led research, and see what clear questions or challenges they pose and what clear articulations they bring across different scales, okay, which are spatial, but across different layers, which are more governance or institutionally related topics that you can actually expose and reveal.
Okay.
I think, yeah, Dubravka wants to say something. Hello, Dubravka?
I didn't unmute my mic, so sorry. First I want to commend you, thank you for this presentation, and I want to commend you how you understand well that there is no one solution that you can kind of carpet over whole London, and that the way how your ultimate agenda of car-free city can be applied is really, it has to be in response to the various communities, because it's response to various type of people who live there and various constraints. What I think that, and this will build to some of the previous comments, which I think covered some of the things, especially what Elena kind of really carefully broke down as almost like your design agenda. And here I use design as more expensive than just drawing in there. But I think you got over, you have showed us really well in your project what is the potential of removing car traffic for a lot from these spaces. But that additional more consideration of what is a different set of constraints that removing of car traffic brings would have allowed you to push your project further. And I think that this is something that you can develop in the next phase. For example, I a little bit kind of shredded when I saw one of your visualizations in which one of the formerly traffic lower level access roads for parking was covered with urban gardening, because I thought, okay, did you also consider access to fire trucks? And would blocking that street prevent the fire or emergency truck to reach certain destination? Because even though you remove all the kind of private cars from your streets, you have to think about provision of accessibility and questions of kind of fire protection, maintenance, garbage removal, all these things that are now dominantly catered for in the city by motorized vehicles, and there is no option. So kind of mapping these sets of constraints with your wishes and potentials will allow you to have a more nuanced overlap where your design intervention then is. And some things will be spatial, and some things will be on a policy level, and some things will be also regulated with the timetables. And so this is something. One thing that you can maybe look into, and I think that here Barcelona is a really commendable, of course, example, also because of the process they went through in order to remove traffic. I think that there is a lot of interesting solutions of how do you manage traffic in urbanism of New Belgrade or New Zagreb, in the blocks that were developed in the 60s, 70s, and especially in the 80s when the number of cars increased. For example, Dugave neighborhood in the New Zagreb, where really there was this understanding that you keep the perimeter of all the kind of traffic to the perimeter of the block, but that this did not mean that you completely erase accessibility of cars or fire trucks or supply chain into the blocks, because you had kindergartens, schools, supermarkets, you had things inside of the blocks that needed to be supplied and maintained. So this kind of a more also looking into also how then this friction is solved, because besides you still, even if you say let's remove all the cars you have, then also consult the accessibility issues. Is 200 meters walking to the nearest public transport something that is easy for everyone? Who gets excluded if this is the only provision? If the only way to access public transport is to walk 200 meters. So what are recommendations there, and what are the ways to remedy this without necessarily kind of sticking to the cars? Because in a lot of cases, and especially in more working place neighborhoods, removal, for like insisting on bringing, for example, bicycle infrastructure really hits hard those neighborhoods, because it always goes with underinvestment in public transport, which means that a lot of people who have to commute from these areas then have actually reduced accessibility to their work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Judith?
Again, I think it was a very interesting presentation, and it is very much up my street of the work I am doing. I have just written a paper on the London plan, and a critical one, of course, and also about what could be called the post-COVID new planning for the post-COVID new normal. And in the early stages of the lockdown, I felt, yes, there is a hope, because London, and I live in central London, so it was completely quiet, the pollution went down and everything. okay, hooray, that would be an absolute ideal situation where your kind of ideas could be at least experimented with, if not imposed altogether. Now, I have a few remarks in relation to comparisons with other cities. I mean, Barcelona and London are really not at all the same structure. I agree that the process is interesting to observe and see what they did in those places, but I think our physical structure is completely different. We don't have blocks, we don't have regularity, we don't have any of this. I mean, ours is a mishmash, unplanned. So perhaps it would be a good idea to look elsewhere, like, for example, the 15-minute efforts of Paris. There again, the process is interesting because they have been going on and on and on and on, reducing car use in a very dense area of central Paris. Although the French, if they could, they would go to bed with their cars. So the car is freedom, car is all this sort of stuff. And unfortunately, our prime minister has again fired this one when he said, don't take public transport when you go back to work. You spend money in city centers, but go there in your own car as a single person occupant. So if you look at the pollution is right back now, congestion is worse than ever. So I think that there is the political side, the regulation side, the negotiation between the various groups and their claims to their own justice, freedom, and so on is absolutely crucial. So I think I agree absolutely with Elena to say it's a good idea to stand back a bit and say, well, what is actually our understanding of these blocks and how can we facilitate and encourage more negotiation and so forth, putting all this on the map. It's a good moment actually at this time. I have some more general points again, which I felt were applicable to all the 4 projects. When I looked at the website, so I feel the font is so absolutely minute that I cannot read it on my very big Mac screen. So, and if you enlarge it, then it gets fizzy. So communication is also that you make yourself intelligible. That's number 1. Number 2 is also you have millions of slides. So you race through them. So it's absolutely impossible to even focus your eyes on what you're actually showing. So again, I think maybe you have to think again about what is your message. And if you only have 10 minutes or 7 to present the stuff, so what do you keep in and what do you leave out? And a way around that one, it seems to me, is this idea of having websites for the students. I think it's a great idea. And I've looked at all of them. But again, if I come from the outside, absolutely not knowing anything about what these projects are about and what the approach of the AA is to all that and so on, I don't think people could grasp it, especially with animated type of pictures, which are just going around very fast and so on. So you know, what is the message? So you have to really think. I think it would be a good idea to make an effort about not just presentation, but communication with your visuals, with your words, with your, I mean, there's lots there. It's much more than anyone can grasp in this short time. So it's a matter of rationing yourself and say, what are actually the key diagrams, and then focus on those and put your arguments around those. And I think this goes for the other projects as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
okay,
you.
thank you. Yeah.
Billy?
Yeah, so I'm going to just pick up a couple of the threads that other folks have put down, because this was really fantastic. And in some ways, I think this project is doing something really important, which is just sort of making the kinds of projects or places that a Green New Deal might make possible feel really normal and doable and kind of pragmatic, which are not adjectives normally assigned to the Green New Deal, which is pretty cool. And so, I mean, I think it's interesting to focus on vehicle and pedestrian safety on like the question of justice, but I would have liked to see a little more discussion or a little more attention to the sort of material investment side of this. So the sort of particular places, neighborhoods, and the sort of justice or frontline community argument being part of the justification for why you're sort of foregrounding the places you're foregrounding and the people you're sort of foregrounding. I mean, I think it's great. In this picture here, we see some sanitation workers working, and I think one of the things you would want to be able to sort of people to take away from some of these images, from the framing, the rhetoric at the beginning of this, is how the kind of jobs, carbon, and public health benefits that you're thinking about directing towards frontline communities are actually like working. So I think there's a question for me here about I'm both like really attracted to the normalcy of some of these drawings, and also really believe that if we think the sort of jobs, labor, and justice pieces of the Green New Deal are particularly important, probably also means we need to find new ways to sort of to render or at least annotate some of these interventions. And so that's the thing I would ask you to just kind of think about as you keep going too. I think more kind of like a larger kind of framing scale, there's kind of an unanswered political economic question here too, which is just around how you kind of turn off the spigot or the multiple spigots that drive car culture and vehicle miles traveled, which includes, you know, road builders, roadway engineering, fossil fuel companies, builders, real estate developers, and you don't really take that group on here. And I think one of the things that you know, sort of designing car culture out of cities will require is thinking about a sort of political and urban formulation or agenda that brings other constituencies together that can contest that particular complex. Because otherwise, I think, you know, a lot of this will, I just don't know that there's really a path forward without taking on that complex of interests. And one way to do that, I think, is to focus here a little bit more, in addition to just the jobs labor piece, but on the unbuilding piece, which you're doing a lot of here. You're proposing to unbuild a lot of really bad parts of London, and to do other things there. But I think focusing on some of those kinds of degrowth side of this a little bit more is where there's still a lot, I think, of sort of untapped potential on these proposals.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Liam
wanted.
Hey, just wanted, thanks for the presentation, guys. I thought the work is really, really amazing. Lots of really beautiful illustrations and drawings and diagrams. And just wanted to, I guess, reiterate what other people have been saying around, you know, the next step would be almost how you could shape the message in a really sort of clear way that's aimed at a particular audience, like whether it's some politicians or some developers or other stakeholders, and how you could make this thing almost appealing to them. So how you might be able to almost influence them and build support around this kind of future. And then the other thing that I want to, you know, observation I want to make compared to like when I was doing the landscape urbanism course a few years ago, there's such a great opportunity in terms of like when I was doing it, we did the project for the whole of the Mediterranean Sea. But now you're doing a project, you know, in London. So there's this great thing where you can almost like talk to all these different stakeholders and government agencies and traffic planners, the people that are actually making the decisions around this environment. So I don't know whether maybe you did that, or maybe you're not actually in London at the moment. So to do that is really difficult. But that's the sort of the real opportunity about doing a project, you know, much more zoomed in than what we were doing. Is you can actually talk to people that are doing this kind of work and see how that would influence your project as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm not in London here now, but it might be a bit difficult, but we will try to find out how to make it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for the comments, all very useful. And yeah, I mean, one of the main things was this idea that the connection with local stakeholders that will inform the project, and obviously that hasn't been really developed. But yeah, I mean, I think all the comments are very useful for the students, especially just finalizing the answer to Jeannette. That they have 3 weeks, no, to incorporate some of the arguments and ideas, or at least open up questions on issues that perhaps they didn't have addressed. They haven't addressed, no, like you know, the issue of Figueroa, for example, the issue of communication, clarifying, etc. No, so I mean, hopefully this could be also integrated within the work, which they have some time to still do that. Shall we move to the next team?
Yeah. I guess we will get the urban agriculture team that had
yes.
technical difficulties. Did you manage to sort them out, and is the computer on?
Yes, we are ready now.
Yes, we can show the screen. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
You can start.
Okay, hello everyone. Okay, hello everyone. We are Mengdi Mao, Yixuan Wang, and Yin Huang from Urban Food Group. Our project starts from one of the most common things in our life, the food. We take it for granted that if we go into a shop or restaurant, or indeed just open the takeaway apps, there is going to be food there waiting for us. And food has always been the important theme in policies of different periods. But what's the relationship between food and city is one question that's rarely asked. From the 17th century to nowadays, the food system has grown to be so complex that the cities and the residents' connections with it has become so indirect and unapparent. Recent years have witnessed a tremendous upsurge of interest in food growing in response to the concerns about the continuously rising food prices and food demands, long food miles, and the huge waste which deeply pollutes the environment. Also, this year, under the widespread lockdown, local production emerged even more. The panic buying and largely changed the distribution network triggered the basic need to ensure food supplies closer to home. And there are already numerous precedents. For example, the Capital Group has created over 2,000 community gardens in London. But that's not enough because most of the urban food projects only focus on the production or just one aspect of the whole system. What we want to do is create and flourish a resilient circle. So we start from London food strategy, focus on the idea of good food growing, community gardening, and urban farming to find out the multiple benefits of food growing to see how can we combine them. We find that the motivations for involving in the urban agriculture is various. On the health level, St. Mary's Sacred Garden has gained its reputation for the horticultural therapy to help disabled people, and someone want to learn skills or money through selling food to others. A man named Mark Ridsdale Smith almost be self-sufficient through growing food in his tiny backyard. Others also treasure the community life and communication with others. Residents in Dustin insist on maintaining the Eastern Curve Garden against new development to have more green space inside the block for them to gather together. Therefore, what matters is not only the production. Residents also love buying, selling, and communicating with others. So we want to create a new mechanism which combines all the things. Residents we mentioned before who want to grow food can get access and acquire land in the city and grow food on it. Then directly sell food to the food station or just exchange food with others here. And those who have a passion for urban food but unable to grow food on their own also can get food from the station. All of them can participate in the related activities in the food station. And we also built an app, a platform to allow people from different backgrounds to enter that circle and connect more. What we want to emphasize is a connection between all these logistics. That's where the social cohesion can take place. So in the next step, based on our operation model, we try to help urban residents to find more land to grow food on it. These maps shows research of potential growing land in London. Then for the purpose of finding a specific borough for our experimental project, we overlap the natural and social aspect of London to pick 5 boroughs in the first step as our first choice. Among them, we finally pick Hackney, which has the highest density data. And the first map of Hackney is all about the green area. Then we shrink it with the calculation of growing rate to finally get all the available lands. Then we cluster these lands in 4 parts to organize the shape and the size and sort these lands together to help users of different growing demands in the future by different types. And for further research, we divided available land to 6 parts. For each part, we will conclude several features to summarize information and constraints about how to get access to the land of different types. So after analyzing all this information, we can get a database which helps to create the features in the interactive map. People of different growing demand can choose whatever they want to find a suitable land for them.
Getting a land and grow food on it, we need places to allow a residents buying, selling, and communicating together. So we introduced our food station system, which includes large-scale food center for storage, delivery service for online orders, and small-scale pop-up food spot for daily communication. For the food spot, we built a basic model of 2 meters by 3 meters to serve the function of food exchange and food storage. Then we can make any combination of the base model and plug in other functions, cater to the site scale and demand. To be specific, residents who grow food on small-scale land around their house send food to the closest food spot. Then they can grab a coffee and chat with each other here. Every food spot has food storage and food exchange function, and some of them have an educational showcase with small rest bed. Deliverymen from food center would collect the surplus food in every food spot. We select these 2 buildings in Hackney to be the food center. Both of them are derelict buildings and have big-scale storage space. Local council has encouraged people to use these vacant properties to develop business. As we locate the food spot, we basically want this area have high flow and some outdoor space. So we chose 5 types of land as the preliminary selection: community center, market, street corner, square, and parking lots. Then within the food station system, there are 3 types of distribution route. In the morning around 7 a.m., residents grow food around their home can deliver their food to the nearest food spot, and the staff in food spot will check the food and take the picture of the food. And that's similarly for individual groups or organizations who grow food on larger scale. At 4 p.m., the staff of food spot will check the remaining food, then repack them, and then the rest food will be delivered to the food center for centralized storage. From the simulation, we can see from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. how the food station works in a whole day.
Before we get into the specific design, we need to see what's happening currently in Hackney and what we can do to make it better. Hackney is a complex space where most of the space ranks high when it comes to deprivation, and is also undergoing rapid gentrification recent years. As a result, the inequality is really huge here and is in urgent need for redevelopment, which maintains the traditional community and new development as well, to actively engage people from different backgrounds to connect more here. And Hackney has a good foundation in urban agriculture. Some projects have grown into a flourish business, and the residents show great enthusiasm for growing in the city. Besides, the local council publish active policies to encourage the residents to find land and grow their own. Our project caters to these demands and help them get access to more land. Then we will seek to find a main place to buy local food in Hackney. We find it is diverse and popular with local residents, but it only can occupy parts of the Hackney land with a radius of 500 meters. So if we add a food spot, we can help them all capable of getting local food within 5 minutes walk. Then we, based on the research, we zoom into the Hoxton to see how the residents participate in the whole food station system and how the community connect with each other through time. In Hoxton, there is the Hoxton Shopping Center, shopping area located in the center of Hoxton with the fresh food stores, supermarket, and Hoxton Street Market. And in the current situation, most of the local residents get fresh food from the shopping area or the other street store. And nowadays, there are 2 existing food growing cases in this area. It's Wemsworth Court and St. Mary's Secret Garden.
People in Wentworth Court already organized spontaneously to grow food in the green area just in front of their house and introduced several activities. Another case is St. Mary's Secret Garden, which is an open access garden and offer horticultural therapy to people with disability. Then we will see how our project works. Here shows the available land in the site. And as we mentioned before, we choose the derelict building and meanwhile space as our food center for food storage and online delivery service. In this view, this is one food center located here, which is used to be the Hudgerston Library. Then how the local residents in this city participate in the food station system. We divided our users into 3 tabs with different food destination, land ownership, and workforce. For our user 2, who live in the council flat and want to grow food to eat or sell to others, they can apply for the land. Through our app in the website, they can go to the farmer and choose apply for land and enter the address to find the nearest available land for them. After take the filter they want, they can see more detailed information about the land and get the most suitable land to apply for. In the first stage, we will put 3 food spots near the council. Some of them are 3-corner type and some maybe square type, but they are all of the 5 tabs that we mentioned before. Then people can deliver their fresh food from the land to the food spots for food exchange or other social activities. Also, the food spots offer this fresh food and various activities to other local residents. For our user 1 who already have backyards and planning to grow food in their yards or already produce fresh food, but want to exchange or get more fresh food, they can go to our website to find the nearest food spot to exchange food. They can go to the food station section and distribution part to see the food spot that's near them. And see all the informations of this food spot, how it looks like, what function and activities it has, and what's the fresh food for today. Then they can find a food spot that satisfies their needs. For the user 3 who maybe not live in Hoxton, even live outside Hackney, and who are the individual groups that already growing food in cities but want to find more land to grow food and support fresh food in city, like Capital Growth or the 2 existing cases we just mentioned, they also can apply for the available land via our website. And as time going, more and more people engage in with us and support fresh food in city, and more food spots will be put. The system will become more completed. After years, as more and more people have the experience of food spot, they can vote for the food spot on our website. They can choose to cancel the food spots that may be inconvenience or which they think are in the bad location or poor environment or poor experience. Also, they can vote for the best food station they like. After that, they can vote to put more new food spots that they want. Then we pick an area as an example to see the detailed spatial design. This site includes 3 different kinds of land which can be used by 3 users. The first one is people in backyards. Here is the section. In backyard, we can see every part of the front and backyard can be used to introduce vertical farming and different sizes of raised beds. For people who live in a council flat, a few of them own a private garden, just some lawn around the house and concrete land for parking. We can introduce raised beds and small greenhouses to this area and make full use of the balcony area, so people in the nearby houses can grow food together. Then the third type, unused land. This is for people of same growing ambition. They may not live together, but they can gather together to utilize the unused land. And according to the large scale of the land, they can place raised beds, eco classroom, greenhouse, and introduce other activities to allow others to participate. After growing food, people can send food to the nearest food spot. In this site, there are two kinds of food spot, street corner and parking lot. For this parking lot, it has the area of 408 square meters and is big enough to place the weekly market, which allow a large amount of people to get together. Since our system can happen in Hackney, we also want to find the possibility to apply it in other boroughs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Perhaps we follow the raise hand system if you want to participate, so we can organize it.
Anybody? Ed seems to be.
I just thought I'd press the button while it was quiet.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and I think like the last presentation, there's a real rigor in which you are exploring the issue, and I think that the sort of inventiveness of your strategy, but also I think maybe it's our ability to understand how it could be applied. It's really important kind of to balance between that. It's not purely a utopian proposal that you're setting out. I just got one small comment, and I think that it's certainly something which would be quite straightforward to address in the next few weeks. Is that I felt that there's a difference between looking at the website and the presentation that you gave. The website seems to show a little bit more, let's say, a sort of more easy communication of what the project's about and its three separate elements. And I would encourage you, as you're completing the project, is to think about the image of the project. So if you think about, maybe not for yourselves, but think about for people who are less familiar with your project, at the end of today, when I go and have lunch or I go and join other colleagues on another meeting, what will I be remembering about your project? If I close my eyes, what will I see about your project? So if we think about this, so let's see the image or the impression that your project gives, I think it's extremely important aspect of a landscape project. So I think that at the moment it feels very logical, it feels very well thought through, and I think it feels quite inventive as a structure. But I do think that, let's say, as we are trying to argue our projects and persuade people to build them and to engage with them, we also need to think about, let's say, that the image of landscape that we are proposing. So it's not really a question, it's more just, let's say, how we communicate the overall image and how we make it a persuasive image in the context of that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So for now, because we mainly focus on how to build the entire circle, it means that we also need to highlight what's the proposal of the landscape, actually, what's how people get together.
No. It's not so much changing the proposal or changing the focus. It's more about that's what we might call the mental image of the project. No, if I close my eyes now, what do I see of your project? Do I just see grids and just sort of different network or systems diagrams, or is there a particular way of life that I see will change because of your project? Is there a difference in the my understanding of my world around me because of the way in which you're proposing your project? This is what I'm thinking. So I think it's partly an issue of communication, because your website communicates actually, I think, more clearly, I think, to someone who knows your project less well. I think it's just about, as you're compiling your book, your final presentation, what you choose to give priority to and how you structure that final submission.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leah?
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, that was another great presentation. I had a question about why did you pick and maybe you explained this and I just missed it, but why did you pick Hackney? And I mean, I noticed at the end you sort of mentioned that you were thinking about how this could be like a prototype that could be applied in other boroughs. Like, how do you imagine the system would be different in a different borough?
Yes, we pick Hackney because basically we want to combine people from different backgrounds together. So we think Hackney, a place which is under deprivation, also is undergoing rapid gentrification, is some conflicts here. So the inequality is so huge here. So it's in urgent demand for us to gather all the people, the old one, the new one together. So we want to choose Hackney, and also based on this image shows the social aspects and natural aspects. Hackney has the highest density here.
Yeah, all good. You can go to the next.
Also, I guess that's you mean that we need to show how because different boroughs are different. So how if this can apply to Hackney, how can we apply this to different boroughs? Maybe we need to do some adjustment to face the situations there.
Yep.
Okay. Again, I think we're all going to be congratulating all of you for really beautiful presentations. So thank you for that. I especially like these graphs, which actually remind me of Chinese landscape drawings. But maybe I need to change my glasses a bit, and I need to look more carefully. But they are quite evocative. I guess I wanted to mention the elephant in the room, which is ownership of land, different tenure arrangements, and what your project actually reveals as the fundamental structural barrier to unleashing the productive potential of our cities in a so-called post-COVID, post-carbon transition. I think your historical analysis would necessarily reveal to you that one of the biggest issues is accessibility to land or available land for some of these proposals that you put forward. I guess I'm thinking of not only the diggers and the levelers in the 1600s, but I won't go into that. I am an anarchist at heart, but I'll leave it at that in terms of access to land and the ability to produce your own livelihood. But I guess what was interesting in the UK was the allotment garden movement in post-war. And in a sense, that was dealing with similar issues of shocks to the system, shocks not only of supply chains, but employment generation, if I remember correctly. And I think perhaps what your project starts to reveal to me is, again, this kind of the entanglement of some of the issues that COVID and carbon is showing us is, increasing spikes in unemployment, accessibility to different livelihoods, what we determine to be public goods, and how we actually generate new models of accessing those and building those as communities. So I think for me, I'm always interested in the overarching political statement or agenda in your so-called propositions, and how your projects reveals the kind of unicorns, the beautiful dreams that you bring forward, and again how you might pragmatically bring these forward. So I think the word pragmatism was brought up in one of the previous projects, and I think the whole cohort, all 4 projects coming forward, I think display this interesting contradiction and tension between poetics, pragmatism, politics and policy, and how we might get there. So I would encourage you to perhaps frame the truly radical nature of your proposal in terms of what it shows us about land, where it is, do we have enough of it, who owns it? And in fact, when I look at all of that, I kind of think that here the role is taken back to the local level in terms of the role of municipalities in leveraging land that they already have available and putting it to more public common use, even if it is temporary, but at least it's meaningful. So how we can bring a kind of more radical municipalism to bear in dealing with some of these problems of, in this case, food sovereignty, food security, and food justice. Now, those three terms have slightly different meanings, and it would be interesting to know where you fit this in. Is it food sovereignty? Is it food justice? Or is it food security? Or indeed, is it all three? Have you come across those terms in your research? Yes, no?
Yes, we actually we do some research about the land transforming, but we haven't put it in our PowerPoint because of the limited time. And we also consider things like you said, like the surrounding vandalism, also the land security, and also the labor, and also something others, and we find some examples and take it into consideration.
Okay, so job, when I say the municipalities, I also bring it to, the job centers. We are potentially facing a huge unemployment issue, which councils will have to deal with. So it would be interesting for you to see whether that helps you take some of your proposals one step further, or helps you edit out what should or could be a priority. Because I think, you've come up with a system and you've presented it as quite a seamless, frictionless, beautiful, poetic piece. But at which point does it start to fall apart? And that, in a sense, is quite an interesting one, because it brings it back to the role of governance, or the role of the state, or the role of the municipality in assisting or enabling some of these partnerships to come forward.
Yes, okay.
I mean, maybe I can jump in, because my question feeds kind of can follow this well. I have, I think, thank you for the presentation. As Elena said, we will be thanking you all. And if I don't thank you, this is just because I want to jump to the question. This is for the next two presentations. And I really liked how your website, if you show it for someone, you would think, oh, okay, this is already established, because there are all these questions, like you can apply for land and stuff. Who is this institution that you've been designing? Is this is this something that the Council of Hackney will form as a new institution, public institution? Is it some kind of a civic public partnership which comes from maybe some local initiatives in Hackney which are already interested in acquiring land for allotment gardening, or like managing allotment gardening? Because you've been listing how the 40 years waiting list for allotment garden provision in London. So that maybe this kind of association is together with Hackney making kind of institution which is not private public partnership but civic public partnership, or is this some kind of a startup? Which is, I think that these questions are really important. And as someone who is strongly arguing that the job of architects, we can think of design of new institutions as a spatial and architecture kind of assignment for architects, which is not thinking about what is the square footage, but how actual institutions work and which actors they bring into a continuation. I think that your project fits really perfectly into this agenda. What we are actually designing is a new institution, and then the way we show how this space can be used is just in order to to push this project further, and not necessarily that this should be the design of the project. And in that context, this is also a question like, who maintains this? You have in your project something that are like kind of daily storage units and stuff. Who this maintains this? Who pays the electricity bills? This is all questions about how do you want to help you understand where your institution is situated, which type of people, like, is it Hackney? Is it someone else? Is it some startup that wants to make money out of this and it's driven by application? And what happens when allotted space does not get somebody just abandoned their kind of garden? How do you deal with this? Because you also have this kind of question that people can apply to get a lot of land. So who then decides whether application is approved? Is this something that is a board of those who are already taking care of the land, so that in a way you are part of the process if you participate in the process, or it is an institution that manages, in which those who are kind of taking care of the land, producing food, are in a more client and not managing position. Sorry, I threw a lot of things at you, but I hope that with these sets of questions, you will be able to watch the recording, and will help you kind of push this further in the next 3 weeks, because I think you really have a good base from which you can go into this area.
Good.
Yes, thank you. We think it's very helpful. Thank you.
Actually, our food station provides available land information in the app for producers to find where to grow food, and then they can apply for land or use their private land and apply different techniques into suitable land types.
I think I don't know what's the order. If I can say something quickly.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like a quick comment that in a way also applies to the previous group. I mean, I really appreciated your presentation. I think the work you're doing with the application and the connecting to food system and so on is really great. Maybe like you also as the other group can make like a bigger effort in explaining the big reasons behind it. You show this in the system, like all the benefits that it offers to the communities, right, who participates in this urban farming process. But I think there are great benefits for the larger community. I remember Alfredo mentioned just when we started this session, that the Green New Deal was developed in 2008. So not just as an answer to the climate change and the environmental crisis we are facing, but also of the economic crisis. And I think now there is again another a set of opportunities offered by the current moment. I remember in 2008 in Munich, they launched a competition that was called like Munich 2020. And it also had to do about how could the municipality maintain all the public green spaces in the city. Like this costs to the city a large amount of money. And the winning proposal was a proposal called Agropolis that actually proposed that a vast amount of these urban public areas would be transformed into urban farming. And this could also be a strategy like for temporary use in new development areas, because there were like real estate development projects that got delayed, and so nobody really knew what would happen. And so this was a good opportunity to set a new system and also address larger issues, like you also mentioned, how we get food from a more local context, like so we avoid wasting energy in bringing food from far away, large distribution, etc. I think that really the project is strong, and so maybe having a few slides pointing out even in a more clear way, because what we are trying to address is a policy issue, and as our colleagues here pointed out, like there are a lot of questions that come out from this, like how do we manage the land and why I can borrow it and why not. So I think the more you present what are the real benefits for the overall community, the better. I live in a neighborhood in Brooklyn in which for every city playground, there are 3 or 4 community gardens, and these are open to the community 2 or 3 days a week, as you showed. And that's really a great benefit for everybody living here, and it's a great opportunity also for the municipality to save money and maybe generate income for the people who live there. As I think, someone was mentioning, like give employment, like now a lot of people maybe have more spare time and so on, so I think, this image is really good, and some numbers could come out of it, for example, and show us how many people, I don't know how many people the municipality employs to keep all public spaces open, for example, and gardens and playgrounds.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we'll make it more clear in the next 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in too, if it's okay, because I just have a couple kind of related comments, and would just begin, I think, by saying what everyone else has said, which is this is truly fantastic work. You could all feel really good about where this is, and you still have time to go in the semester. I'm sure you're ready to be done, but this is in fantastic shape. One of them is just like the most, I think, like central comment is just that like farming is a lot of work. So like the act of like producing, like building the farm, maintaining the farm, even if it's a small plot, like, you know, sustenance or hobby farm on your own property, it's just a lot of work. And I think everyone has sort of danced around in their comments, so I won't belabor it too much, just like the question of where this kind of strategy fits within the jobs program, jobs plank of a Green New Deal. I mean, one of the reasons the G&D has become fashionable again in 2020, and it was in 2008, is that it's really the only program to try and fuse both like all three, like the technocratic demands of climate change around carbon with the economic demands of the economic crises of 08 and 20, with the demands of frontline communities who are often last in line for the provision of all of those benefits. So I think you made like a very strong case for why you chose the place you wanted to focus on, which does, I think, deal directly with that justice question. But I would also just think about how you make the case for using this kind of urban farming strategy as a jobs program. And then in the visuals you produce, foregrounding that labor as a piece of like a key piece of the landscape intervention is also hugely important. And then I think the other like question I have is probably less tied to maybe what you might do in the next few weeks and just more about how you frame realizing this work. And is around just kind of treating the food system as maybe a little bit too small here. I think, you know, I think for lots of reasons, it makes total sense to focus in on the city or like the region. But food systems are global. And so thinking about like where you're intervening in that global food system seems particularly important, even if it's just rhetorically how you're thinking about, say, the production of these kinds of either cooperatively owned or community driven urban farms as like a counter to industrial agriculture, and what those two things cost and what the differences are between them also seems particularly important here. But I'll stop there because again, this was fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I come in here? Yes. I have been.
Yes, you did. The only thing is like I hear you very low.
Sorry.
Can
There's something.
Can you hear me now?
A bit better.
Yeah.
Yes.
A bit better. Yeah.
Just get closer to the mic, and perhaps we can get you better. But yeah.
Okay, like that.
No. No, not yet.
Is the mic in your view? I will try. I think that, I mean, Ed has reiterated what I was saying for the previous project, which is about presentation, about how to get the message across. And I think this is a very important point, which would apply to all projects. And he's also right to make a distinction, as I try to do, between types of media you're using. It's a different way of putting your message across on a website or on an oral presentation and so on. So again, I think I like this project very much. I have been involved in this for quite a while. And I would just like to give one example, which I found extremely useful to illustrate the elephant in the room issue and all those kind of stuff, which are very important, which Elena. That was an undertaking in central Birmingham. There was an enormous site, which was basically lying idle, and local people have decided that they were going to use it for urban agriculture for themselves, but they also wanted to do it as a business, so it actually would pay. So it wouldn't just be voluntary or a fashion or something nice to do, but they were really looking into job creation and a livelihood from it as well. So it's a very interesting example to look up. And I mean, long story short, what happened there? So they actually got a permission to use this site temporarily, and they said the sites which are empty where nothing happens. So it was asphalted over and it was boarded up and so forth. And they managed to take it over for, I think, 2 years, something like that. So they were creating these beds. So it wasn't just the local people, it was made open to communities. It was also educational. They involved the children and tried to show them what food is about and so forth. So very, very interesting project. And then came the day when the big developer decided and got the planning application agreed to do a huge development with tower blocks and stuff like that, a new CBD, because right next to the center of Birmingham. And then what happened is, instead of these people looking for another site and take their activities somewhere else, they decided to just went back to the allotments, the old-fashioned way, if they had access to it, and the others just let it run. So basically, the lesson from that is, A, it is useful to negotiate temporary uses for that, but it's also important to have some kind of idea of continuity. And for that, you have to have some kind of institutional support. And that is where the land ownership is absolutely crucial. I agree with that. But also, it's sometimes in the interest of this land occupied and used rather than empty and vandalized. So I think it's a matter of pragmatic negotiation between the various people who have claim to the land. My final point is the one about what's happening to the London plan. The planning system, the new white paper, which basically proposes a free-for-all. So development is absolutely omnipotent, even more so. So I think for these kind of activities to survive, and they have been quite active in Hackney actually, and I would have chosen Hackney as well as the example, because that is where most of the activities have happened. Also in Tower Hamlets, for example, Bromley by Bow, the centre, they have done that for a long time. So that's another very good example. See how they have managed to take the site basically for flighting, and they developed it and set it up and made it educational and growth. So I think there are examples which are very, very positive, and I think that the urban farming is part of our post-COVID climate change, green city strategy, and they are very legitimate. So I think it's very important to have projects like this particular one, and they very practical. I liked especially the aspect how you have looked into these existing areas and say, well, where can we actually, what can we do? Where can we grow this sort of stuff, like leftovers in council estates, for example, which they're not private, they're not used publicly either. So I think it's a very good point, and I would encourage you to continue.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
If there is any other comments? No? You can just move to the next one. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Nandita Rana. I'm a master's in architecture student at the AALU program, and my partner, Rani Chamsuddin, he's an MSc student at the AALU program as well. And we worked together in the first 2 terms of the beginning of the thesis. Then I assisted him in his last term, and I will be taking forward the same thesis for my next term. So any suggestions will be welcome. Now I'll just present. Is it showing my screen?
No. Who is sharing? Who is sharing?
I'm sharing.
Okay. No, we don't see your screen.
One second, I'll try again.
Sorry, I'm having some issues with the Teams.
That's fine. Yeah, just to reiterate, while Nandita solve the issues, is that Nandita will continue developing this project that you'll see for the next term, and she'll finish in January. So out of all the projects, this has more time to be further developed.
Yeah.
Please see your screen, Nandita.
Okay. I'll start now. Our thesis is based on the need of transition from an agriculture, which is cultivation of a field, to a system that uses ecosystem patterns so we can conserve and produce at the same time. Soil, a finite resource, has been subjected to degradation due to agriculture, with warnings given by the UN that UK has only 30 to 40 years left of soil fertility. 13 million hectares of plants and trees which help in combating soil erosion are cut down every year to make room for agriculture, as well as different inadequate agricultural techniques affect soil. Around the world, we see soils as our carbon stores in the form of peatlands, as seen here in the black, and carbon content gradient in the brown. Peatlands stored around 0.37 gigatons more of carbon, which is more than the combined amount stored in the vegetation and atmosphere of the Earth. These peatlands, due to their soil, rich in carbon content, work as exceptional productive grounds. As you can see, the agriculture surrounding them in the green. Inadequate agriculture practices, as depicted by the green, have led to carbon release from these soils, leading to an imbalance in the atmosphere. Here we can see our UK's peatland extents. Inadequate practices like monocropping intensive industrial farms has led to creating a model of production that is isolated and therefore depends on external inputs. Soil culture practices like permaculture and palliculture work towards using ecosystem patterns so it's to its advantage by creating zones and permanent exchange of energy through connecting each element. Therefore, by enhancing soil culture, it creates a better system of support, regulation, provision, and cultural ground. Where did we lose the sense of the natural while managing our landscape for production? Here we see a gradual increase in the UK's parcel size. This was done to make room for the host of mechanical machines assisting the modern farmers. This can be seen as a disconnect with our production grounds. Going through the historical period, we see the role of agriculture and soils change from catering to a domestic demand to industrial farming with the advent of industrial revolution. The increase in population in this period has led to agriculture land taking over UK's woodlands and fenlands. The increased demand has also led to a strain on small farmers, leading them to relocate to towns and cities. This period also brought forward the Domestic Allotment Act, which in history is also often seen as a divorce from nature. Next, we see that fertilizers were introduced in this period to cater to the need of the growing population. Because of inadequate agricultural practices and growing demand, refrigerated meat was imported and rationed. Agricultural machinery upgraded to inversion tilling of fields to turn the soil, as well as we saw a change in labor as well. After the two world wars ended, we saw a creation of an EU framework for agriculture, which was developed under the Common Agriculture Policies, and we also see the formation of DEFRA. Through all these changes, we see a divorce of society and nature as agriculture land increased, but there was a decrease in the number of farmers associated to the lands. How has the UK landscapes been managed under CAP? Agriculture has been managed under the European Union under CAP. CAP works around two pillars. Pillar 1 is the direct payment scheme and Pillar 2 is the rural development scheme. The funding to relieve food insecurity was done according to production potential. The bigger the farm, the bigger the subsidy provided. This led to nearly 3/4 of the funding being ported by only 1/4 of the producers, and just 10% coming into the pocket of small producers. With the introduction of the new agriculture bill, with that Brexit, we will see some transformation, like the power to be granted to local authority to provide subsidies to farmers in a more just manner and to promote sustainable practices. Secondly, public money for public goods is introduced to help farmers sustain the ecosystem services that belong to public, like soil, water, plant life, etc. What's lacking in the new bill is a stronger role of agriculture in climate change.
Nandita, can you just minimize the icon of the meeting in general, which blocks some of the...
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Now we look into DEFRA. Different agencies work under DEFRA, such as non-ministerial departments, executive agencies, non-department public bodies, all funded by the government. The parity of in the expenditure and funding is visible here. Learning from the model developed under the Green New Deal to combat dust bowls of the early 20th century in the US, we find that a soil conservation department for management of our soils is needed for us to truly be carbon free. Soil management policies based on this can be revisualized with soil at the heart of public goods catering to farmers with various departmental supports like land tenure and community governments, tools and technology, finance and economics, as well as to realize the need to for interconnections to come up with better support, which can be monetary, knowledge-based or decision-making. Now we look at how the UK's carbon stores have been affected by agriculture. UK has three main varieties of peatlands: raised bogs, blanket bogs, and fenlands. They have been acting as excellent carbon stores and managing and sequestering carbon. They are formed by catchment of water, deployment of marsh vegetation, and creation of peat. We see an array of farming activities on these peatlands, leading to intense carbon release. Agriculture, comprising only 7% of the peatlands, emits 40% of the carbon emissions in peats. The fenlands, also known as breadbasket of the UK, heavily depend on these drained peatlands for production. These production-rich soils are drained to make them more sustainable, suitable for arable agriculture, releasing carbon that has been stored in them, these peats, over millions of years. We also see how peatland extraction has led to decrease in soil surface of the East Anglian region, which in turn has led to a lot of coastal flooding around these areas. Now let's study the natural soil ecosystem as well as the above ground vegetation ecosystem. Gills are formed by a system of elements made up of plants, soil, animal, and insect communities, working as traders, messengers, distributors, interactors, and manufacturers. Permaculture is based on these principles of using these natural ecosystem patterns for an intrinsic system of each element supporting another.
There's noise in the background. I don't know who is it.
The noise?
It's construction.
Right.
Okay, but
if you give me a second, maybe I can ask you.
Okay, yeah, we'll give you a second.
Hi, excuse me, I have a final presentation going on. Can you do this later? Just like 10 minutes. Thank you. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you. Okay. We have to follow.
Sorry about that. Permaculture is based on these principles of mimicking or using these natural ecosystem patterns for an interesting system of each element supporting another, and zoning systems to create models of production and conservation. It's based on a low external input and high productivity. Let us study this diagram for better understanding. Each element can be seen as a system that requires some input and generates an output. We will now try to discover these connections in a permaculture farm. Here are the different elements with their the input required and the output generated. We can see these relationships in this section. Also, permaculture provides a framework of creating niches to create microclimates on your site, as well as wildlife corridors for you to learn from the system as it is with the seasons. Yeah. Now we'll move into how we'll transition the broads in East Anglia. Rani. Hello.
Hi, Rani, I guess you're mute because I muted you before. I thought it was yours. Can you open your mic, Rani?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Moving to the transition part, we will focus on East England peat in our project. And in this map, we showed the existing, previous, and historical peat with intensive farm and how much each degrades soil and peat. We see how the different output and input are assessed in different agricultural technique, and find out that the permaculture doesn't just increase productivity, decrease in input, but also support an array of ecosystem services, creating permanent production ground. And we realize that emission due to paludiculture is lowest and would be the best technique to be used in the broads. In the historical maps, we can see the evolution of the Norfolk Broad from the Three River system to getting flooded because of the increase in the sea level, and see how the environment has changed over the year, and to show a layering of peat and sand bed, as well as we see how open marshes were changed into intensive system. We can also see the different stages of wetland plantation in Norfolk Broad, and we will identify the endangered species and animal around those sites. We have analyzed also the management of the management systems that are in play in the broad landscape. We look at the farm around the broad and the peatland that use governmental subsidies and under environmental stewardship, and some of special status sites that are internationally registered as site of conservation and learning. Moving to the large-scale strategy, we have first highlighted the existing intensive agriculture happening in the site and its impact on peatland degradation. So first, agriculture happening is arable intensive farming. Second is grazing intensive agriculture. And those type of agriculture are leading both to peatland degradation. The second step in our strategy is to study the ownership, which we showed the environmental stewardship private farm, which subsidy go for public goods. And the second type of ownership is the public farm, which fund goes for youth farmer and the relation of the farm to the both farm typology to the water system. Moving to analyzing the existing water system composed from wetland, canals surrounding the river, secondary drain, which are both used to contain the floodment when it's occurred. So the first design step in our strategy is to have paludiculture farm going from the river to the flooding extent. And then we can expand permaculture farm from the flood extent towards the existing farms. The paludiculture farm will be will play the rewetting system, and the surrounding permaculture farm system will play the role of an ecological surrounding of the peatland, and both farm will play the role of peatland restoration. We have studied 120-year event flooding, and we recognize that there is a 0.3 meter flood area, a 0 meter flood area, and a 0.6 meter flooding area. And based on this 1 in 20-year flooding event, we will divide the area to managed, semi-managed, and natural rewetting system. the 0.6 meter flood area will be managed. The 0.3 meter flood area will be semi-managed, and the unflooded area will be a natural flood area. So our system will water system will be based on the existing primary canal, and we will be adding to the existing secondary canal. We will be adding to the secondary canal to the existing one to enhance the rewetting process, and tertiary canal between the added and the existing secondary canal to enrich the plant by the water. We have also showed the possible biodiversity corridor, which can be used as a connection between the natural site, and these are our main proposed. These are our main proposed layer. So we have the connection between the nature reserve, adding to the existing water system secondary and primary canal, and dividing the area into managed, semi-managed, and natural rewetting area. So moving into our zoom-in site and our zoom-in strategy, in order to explain more the proposed water system. So that is the existing condition of our zoom-in site, and where the pumped water system is playing a role of flood management, and as well as the water system for this intensive farm. We realized that the site drainage and to create a system of secondary water canal. And next, looking at the potential wet site, which we can create a system of vegetation that grow from a very wetland area to a cattle farming, which is known to bring in nutrients for restoration and gradually go from reed, swamp, and moss beds to willow and alder plantation, and also have a walkway which can be improve the accessibility of farmer. In this two section, we have showed the transition from existing condition with the intensive farming canal, which are preventing the area from flooding, to the proposed secondary tertiary canal, which will be rewetting the area, and the transition from intensive farming crops to paludiculture crops. And in our zoom-in section, we have showed the detailed transformation from intensive farming to paludiculture, and how in paludiculture we need less machine but more people. And we showed also the different steps in order to reach the transformation from constructing a secondary canal, planting paludiculture crops, and harvesting them. So soil culture policy can be visualized with soil at the heart of the public good at DEFRA, through the creation of soil conservation services, catering to farm with knowledge-based support as well as monetary support. This can be done by creating interconnection between the policy stakeholder. So back to our large-scale strategy, we have created.
Rani, just try to wrap up.
Yeah. Back to the large-scale strategy, we have created corridor, which are going to be the zone 5 of our permaculture, to link the different natural reserves in the area. So and the ARC proposal will go beyond and have the implementation on other area in the UK. So we have created an international model for regulation of this special site. We have proposed international committees that regulates the usage of soil in food production when exporting and importing goods that are directly produced from soil. The food product trade of UK before Brexit shows the UK import from country close by, but the future projection for food trade show UK growing its reach of food trade, and that's only mean growing the carbon footprint. So here we can see the model of different type of food crop and the amount of soil carbon content that is needed to grow them year after year. And applying a virtual soil expense to this trade can help mitigate as well as encourage country to reevaluate the way to produce food. And if intensive farming continue the practice by the present issues, we will end up losing our peatland and soil carbon content in 50 years. But if we move to permaculture and paludiculture wet farming, and and wet farming and conservational area site will play a role of peatland and soil carbon restoration. Yeah, that's it.
Good. Any of our jurors want to raise the hand?
Ed has raised hand.
Wait.
Yeah. Ed.
Hi.
Hi, all of you. Thank you for the presentation again. I was lucky enough to see you present the work earlier in the year, so it's great to see how far you've developed it. I think it's also it's interesting for me. Let's say your attempts to draw what is very so the micro scale nature of soil to a larger sort of planetary discourse. So congratulations on that. I don't have anything that I'd like to add which hasn't already been said in the last two presentations, but I do think that there are some questions primarily for me about the politics of the land, which you're scratching the surface of, but I would encourage you to keep on digging. And then the other is the nature of some of the representations. For me, feel not as grounded as they could be, and there's partly, let's say, the sort of the more generic sections that you're drawing, which don't feel like they're grounded in particular places. But I know from your previous presentation, you have you've done the research and you know very well the part of Norfolk and the Broads that you're exploring. But I think that some of the representations don't show that knowledge that you have. So, but yeah, altogether, congratulations.
I would also like to join with Ed,
Yep.
with congratulating you. I think it's really important. I'm really glad to see that there is this kind of a shift that is happening, which in soil it becomes something that is considered, because I think until relatively recently, only in specialized circles, the soil is a resource that needs a lot of care has not been, and that just treating soil as a resource is a kind of resource has been really problematic. And I think that you really kind of draw well this connection between the planetary discourse and kind of the local issues. I agree with Ed. I really think that this is in the context of UK, which has such a strong land ownership politics, which is, if you're from afar, incredibly mind-boggling to realize how much feudalism there is still and who owns the land in the UK. This is really something that needs to be considered. But there is another elephant in the room that I would be interested to know if you addressed, and this is the question of who are the workers who take care of the land. Because the work that this type of change in the relationship towards the land and the different practices of agriculture that you're proposing, although this is the only way we can, kind of the only way out almost of the predicament or collapse we are living in, really requires the complete restructuring of the relationship of both cultural and labor relationships towards the land. And I've just remembered when looking at your presentation, the news that was a couple of months ago when one of the, I think, harvesting or planting season was starting in the UK, and because of the COVID and then Brexit, realizing of like kind of the popular UK press that how much these practices in UK are reliant on imported, really exploited temporary migrant labor, and then the shock that there is not enough UK people, even though they are under or unemployed, willing to apply to do this type of work? Did you do some kind of also research, which could communities be where the labor will come? Or did you think about the potential strategies of treating this relationship to the soil as a kind of cultural issue in which relearning relationship with the soil is important?
Yeah, basically we want to have the labor as our part of our society, as part of the society, because like permaculture is based on teaching people how like agriculture go.
Hello?
Hello?
Rani?
Yeah, yeah. No. You haven't heard me, maybe? Or...
Go.
Sorry, I was talking. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so definitely we want to emphasize a lot on the relationship of soil, cultural relationship of soil and society and people. That is like we kept on mentioning the divorce with nature, and we want to definitely try to rework a framework which we sort of have through permaculture policies and ideologies of creating the cultural grounds for people to come and have a stake in the farms and the production of like food, as well as for another thing we want to introduce that might just bring about a spike in people taking up these techniques would be creating a program for young farmers in public farms to and help them experiment with these techniques and help them get back into agriculture, and that's what we've thought till now.
Thanks, Nandita. I think Billy raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you. So I just would begin, I think, by echoing the first two comments about just how fantastic this proposal is. I think especially the ability to connect between the site and the planetary is just exemplary in this work. And so again, you should feel really good about where that is. And I think, you know, this proposal in some ways feels more technocratic to me than some of the others. I know we were just sort of talking about this like question of culture and land and food, but in like some ways, this is very much like a water management, flood control, and agriculture or food system kind of plan or proposal. And that's okay. I think there are ways you could think about maybe leaning into that technocratic side a little bit more without being didactic in some of the ways that you both like visualize and talk about this work. So really like showing us like how this land, in addition to producing food, in addition to acting as like an intervention in this global food supply system, is, to Dubravka's point, like acting again as like a key piece in like the labor question for the region, and also sequestering a bunch of carbon or taking carbon out of the sort of global system in different ways of managing the land. And I say that because no one's ever going to really understand the Green New Deal through like the molecules or the electrons of the energy transition. So through like the carbon in the atmosphere or through like the electricity in your house, we're not going to get on a meeting and charge up our computers and like know that it's powered by wind or solar instead of coal or natural gas or whatever. But they will through the kinds of landscape interventions that you're proposing. And I just think both like in the visual material you show us and in the proposals themselves, there are ways to try to make that more legible to people. Just all of the other work you're doing that's not just purely about food production, because there's a lot here that isn't food production. And I think, you know, on the framing piece, and again, because I think you did such a great job of connecting these sites to a global system. I would also just want to hear, you know, in a final presentation, or if you pick this up again in your next term, you know, what kinds of contestations or confrontations you're proposing with the forces that drive industrial agriculture. So you're basically choosing fights to pick. So tell us like why, tell us with who, and what kind of political, economic, or materialist case you're making for the agenda you're putting forward. So what are the other kinds of constituencies you could imagine, coalescing behind this kind of an agenda, and how might that, provide enough power to actualize some of the things you're proposing here?
Yeah, so at the end of our presentation, as we mentioned about the virtual soil trade. So this concept is somewhat similar to the virtual water expenditure trade that is already present. So we want to basically maybe concretize that and help create an international body that regulates trades and food products that are produced, which technique they've used, how much carbon is lost in using those techniques, so how much soil is lost. So maybe one way to implement stricter guidelines internationally, not just nationally, would be to create an international body that regulates the food trades. That's one approach that I'm going to take forward, as well as right now we're just talking about, we've taken up the site as the Broads because we wanted to mention peatlands and as the carbon stores, and we wanted to highlight the role of soil in that sense, but would definitely want to take it forward by talking about agriculture in general in the UK and how that's degrading and we're losing our soils in industrial farming. So those are the two ways forward.
Thanks, Nandita.
Yeah, Judith.
Judith. Yeah.
Because I found that very interesting because it's totally out of my depth, but it was very systematically presented and so on. So I have learned something. But so from my standpoint, I have two questions. One is, you show this area of the Broads in East Anglia, and I agree with the comments of about British feudalism in the 21st century. So land ownership and who really sits on it and excludes everyone else. But there are certain rules from our common law, and that one of these, you have a right of access to these places. For example, for gambling and footpaths and so forth. So, they're not very enforced, but there is quite an important lobby in the UK who make sure that not everything is gated off and so on. And so my question is really, you have focused obviously and rightly so onto a more sustainable food production. That's my understanding, and management of the land and so on. Of course, there is different demands on that land, including for ramblers and people who go to the countryside for leisure and recreation and so on. So how do they fit in to this whole transformation of the landscape and the soil and so forth? I mean, how accommodate visitors, ramblers, people who have nothing to do with agriculture, but just want access to the countryside. So that's the first question. My second one is, because you are from India or somewhere, so there's a lot of agriculture on there, and probably not everything is very ecological. I don't know again my depth, but so my question is, how would you, and you have the global view, so how would you apply the knowledge you have acquired in this work, in this research, to your own country, and again to the politicians, to the elephant in the room kind of situation of how you can also improve the ecology and the ecosystems, which are also under pressure in India. I mean, again, I have no idea, but question.
Okay, maybe I'll answer the second question and Rani can take up the first question. So basically, what we've not expanded on, and I would in my thesis forward, is the detail of permaculture, like permanent agriculture, and how sustainable that is. And the plight of agriculture in India is deteriorating ever since India was colonized, basically, and the farming techniques changed. So definitely I would want to think of a model where, because in India, quite frankly, there isn't much talk about climate change, and far from, like, agriculture is the last the bit that they'll think about when they're thinking about climate change also. So definitely moving forward, I would like to try to at least apply the permaculture principles, because the solution is out there. The only issue is of implementation and the period of transition. So that is what the whole thesis I want to basically look at, how those policies can be, or the different stakeholders can come together and help that transition to happen.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, concerning the first question, we are planning to create dikes and pathways between the wetland and the wet farming and paludiculture farm, in order to the visitor come to know and learn about paludiculture and learn about permaculture and wetland farming as well.
So this is part of your project.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I think it's important. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm not able to raise my hand, so I always feel I'm interrupting at the very first moment. So take this as a hand raise and then let me know when I can speak, okay?
I think if it's no one else, then you can.
Okay, okay, so I'm going to speak.
We have Elena and then Jeannette.
Okay, so, sorry, Jeannette, if I bumped in there, but I'll wait for the end then. Okay, well, again, I think what I really like about all these projects is that no matter at what scale the entry point is, the ambitions are always vast. So, I mean, again, commendations to everyone in landscape urbanism for taking on the challenges. What I'm interested in is, in a sense, not the elephant in the room this time. It's the machine that's not in the room this time. Okay, so, there's been a lot around the potential perceived impacts of robotics in industrial agriculture. But also, if you look at what's happening or what's commented on in some forums like the peer-to-peer forum, I don't know if you know that kind of platform, which looks at commons issues. I remember in the past there was quite a flurry of activity around how community groups can organize at scale to deploy the benefits of nanomachines, robotics in dealing with issues of efficiency, kind of targeted practices which ensure that you deal in a very targeted manner. So, a lot of your diagrams, I think, are pretty much locked into kind of redundant frameworks of farming, if I might say. So I'm going to be a bit provocative here, but I think you need to look at what's hovering above the soil, okay? Because it's coming, and in fact, it's already here. Industrial farmers, at scale are using it, and I think we literally leapfrog those technologies into a more collectivized, appropriate. So we can close them back, basically. So I would say think of the machines and how you wish to accommodate them in your diagrams, and also in the agency with kind of new labor kind of land relationship. There is an issue here that, increasingly there's going to be less labor used. So what is the impact of that? Okay. And can you find a way, in terms of, obviously the big issues around transition politics, right, and transition agendas, is how do you absorb that surplus into other processes that your system is showing us require human interface, human interaction. And I think in a sense for me, and I know I'm taking it beyond where your project lies, but again, your project is a provocation to the field, pardon pun, right? Okay. So it would be interesting to see in these visualizations, and again, this is a comment across the field in terms of design as research and as agency, is what is it you're showing us that we didn't see before, right? So these are not diagrams in as much as they're not static illustrations, but I think you should look at your work again and see what it is you're provoking, right? Is it an elephant? Is it a machine? Is it a process? Is it an institution? So I guess that's what I think you've offered me, and I thank you for that. Because one more question is that permaculture is a groovy hippie thing. I'm on it, I'm in it, I'm there, right? But it is being enclosed, and I'm using Marxist terminology here, which also has a history in terms of how the commons have been enclosed. So I'm speaking in puns and in metaphors. I think permaculture, there's a danger that it is being enclosed by large industrial agricultural practices, right? So I think, again, there's a challenge that we need to at least acknowledge in terms of how do you ensure that the ethos and the ethics and the ideologies of permaculture are held true. And I think we need to recognize that this process is already happening. If you look at, I'm going to give you one example to look at, and then I'll shut up. Stanford guy, I forget his name now, son of, hippies from the 70s, which were instrumental in changing a lot of stuff happening in Silicon Valley and all the rest of it that was going on there, took the idea of permaculture and has applied it to a real estate development project in Almere, right? The eco village. That's permaculture, but if you start to dig deeply, it's really about using permaculture and a way of life, right, to the privileged few to sell a software platform, right? So I think all of this stuff, great on the surface, but much like the elephant that's in the room or the machine that's not in the room, I think we have to deploy a level of critical thinking to acknowledge where the dark side lies and how William was saying which battles you choose to pick, but it's for you to show us where these battle lines are drawn, I think. I mean, I don't want to be too conflictual in my terminology now, but I think there's a lot of ambition in every single one of these projects, but we have to be quite tactical, I think, in what and how we bring these to bear.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time, so I will keep this super quick. I really like your project and the way in which you go to the very small detail of the sections and the techniques and so on to the larger scale in the historical evolution. I think this is great. Following on many of the comments, both on representation and people, I feel like it's missing a bit of dynamics and change over time. Like we don't see people, we don't see other species, other ecosystems that you're creating. Although this is your main point, that you're going towards something that is more biodiverse and more dynamic compared to industrial agriculture. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that, and this last comment by Elena, I think adds to it, is that you mentioned that you're going to change from a very machine-intensive agriculture towards a labor-intensive agriculture. So this requires a change that cannot happen from one day to the other. So how this would happen and how can maybe different ways of urbanization support it, or how this is connects to centers that are already there and so on, this is important. And maybe it's also important to think what happens afterwards. Because maybe this way of doing agriculture will also become more machinic or more like less labor intensive. And so what can happen afterwards? What is your system enabling for the territory to last in a longer term? And that's it.
Thank you for your comment.
And I have just one short more addition, because I know, Nadita, you will be continuing to work.
Definitely.
And it's like a historian in me who cannot resist. I think that there is a lot of what, and it's provoked by what Elena said, how a lot of this, progressive solutions end up being really enclosed or used as an enclosing agent. But there is, I think, cultivation concepts such as cultivation, land improvement were historically used to enclose land. The way, like, for example, when the British colonized Ireland, and then when they started colonizing Turtle Island, they really were defining who cultivates the land in which way in order to say this land is free, it is kind of non-used, let's take it, or this is the practice. So maybe looking into how the strategies operated and figuring out, is there a knowledge that can be kind of reverse engineered there? Would be something that might kind of help you develop further this. Also, as a complementary way to think about these international bodies, which, especially in the last three or four decades, were actually more agents for further enclosure and not to establish this more equitable world.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. If there's no more comments, we have to go to the last project.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna go a little bit like over the 3 hours, but I hope everybody can stay. Is Forest N ready for the presentation?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nanta. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, you can see it.
Yeah, in case of delay of the internet, we provide a video to make sure the fluency of our presentation, and you can see the link in the chat. So, should we start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Our team working on the forest, and team members including Yufei Dong, Qiuxi Li, and Chanran Luo. We are aiming to break people's stereotype of looking at forest and giving back to the forest. Forest could be considered in a multidimensional way with multiple meanings as forest N, including production, biodiversity, carbon sink, but all of them only emphasize the benefits of human. While the concept of Wood Wide Web gave us a clue to understanding the forest from the nature dimension. Our project is to find a way of integrating this reciprocal understanding into current forestry policies and grants, as humans plays an essential role in forests for the reciprocal accomplishment, starting from the changing forest metaphor. In terms of the social meanings, in the early stage, China considered themselves as guests of nature. In 16th century, European treated nature as machine and the influence of God. And in the following stage, it came to recovering domain phase. Between 17th and 19th century, European countries were in a truly to command the world stage. Here are the current alternatives to the dominant Western discourses. Like in 2018, China proposed a community of shared future idea and advocate protecting nature on a global scale. We also provide alternative metaphors as those relate to our management principles. First is about indigenous honorable harvest. They treat nature as gifts and suggest harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Tree could be considered as a wise teacher in the 19th century, while in the present, nature considered as a part of ourselves.
In the latest metaphor, the forest is considered to be a carbon sink. How much carbon does forest sequester? Commonly used method mainly focused on the above-ground carbon storage, but ignore the carbon sequestrated underground. To better understand the forest as a carbon sink in the UK, we use Hope Park as a prototype for carbon measurement. Fieldwork including information of species, DBH, and the density. Then we got the carbon stock in each compartment by inventory method. Carbon sequestration in the forest is a topic of worldwide concern today. This carbon metaphor leads to a mentality where trees are considered exchangeable and sellable carbon credit, in which only human benefits are emphasized. On the global scale, the carbon credit is traded through carbon market between countries. It leads to the commodification of forest carbon, which resulted in monoculture forest obscuring other forest dimensions.
But is this all about carbon? What does carbon mean to the forest? Carbon is also a form of communication that builds a reciprocal relationship between plants. Carbon exchange are commonly known as the phase of breeding and the food transition. Reciprocal connection also happen between neighboring plants. Mother trees, as a metaphor meaning of veteran trees, provide carbon to its seedlings to give them a head start, and the seedlings ensure their species have a more dominant role in the ecosystem. And the dying tree will donate all their nutrients and sugars to their surroundings. Some plants, which are unable to do photosynthesis, relying on receiving carbon from the networks. Well, mycorrhiza network can exchange not only carbon, but also more resources. Plants under attack can send out warnings to others, and Mother Tree can help the diseases one get it through. Wood Wide Web is a scientific way of reciprocity. In fact, this symbolic metaphor has existed for hundreds of years. Our project is about designing a policy assessment grant and manual book that challenges our understanding and relationship with forests, starting from Hook Park.
Before that, we need to know more about forestry policy developed in the UK and its reflection on Hook Park. After World War II, Hook Park was almost clear-felled and served for the wood production. With the help of Forestry Commission, it has been replanted. During the period, policies not only focused on the reforestation, but also started to notice the recreation in the forest. Since 1982, Hook Park has been used as a school, and policies started mentioning wildlife, biodiversity, and sustainability. Since 2015, a sustainable way of burning biochips mentioned in the guidelines have been used in Hook Park. Also, in the UK Woodland Assurance Standard, maintaining the continuity of mother tree habitat is emphasized. Policies can help to shift the woodland and change its relationship with human beings by giving subsidies. The current scheme of woodland management plan is used for creating a 10-year plan to meet the UK forestry standard. The process includes survey and analysis, but how much money the forester will get only depends on the area of the woodland. What we want to change is giving the subsidies according to the woodland condition assessment and encourage people to take part in activities giving back to the forest. We categorize each item from requesting to giving back, and then emphasize the actions like cultivating fungi and mother tree remain. In each item, we also refined the standard of evaluation. Here shows the current condition of Hook Park, and then what could we do to improve the results of the assessment.
In order to get more grants and improve the forest health, we launched our manual book. We want to look at forests vertically throughout the whole project with multi-dimensional concerns. It starts from the forest life cycle. There are some general management actions, including thinning, crowning, and etc. Based on Wood Wide Web concept, we adjust these actions. The point of it is to choose the least impact tools and carry more about giving back to the nature. We found a general model to guide those actions, and then we develop our own Wood Wide Web models, caring more about the understory, mother tree, fungi, and soil. In order to conduct those actions, we have a tool catalog analyzing how to choose a proper tool in both carbon-related and non-related ones. With models, we found out another catalog of broadleaves to see how these trees will change due to the process of management operation. Each from young one to the old will have different shapes and structure after thinning, carpetting, raising, topping, and reduction. The conifer pop has a similar crowning process, but behaves differently in the vertical. For the soil, we do the insect control using soil, apply organic matter to see the subtle changes in the soil. We regard some leisure and working activities as part of reciprocity, including tourism, education, work, exercise, relaxing, timber production, and secondary production. When we list those activities, we consider its current stage and the possibility happening in Hook Park. Also, we provide timber usage based on its properties. Those activities could be classified into taking and giving back. Few examples shown here, while at the present some of the protective actions haven't been taken place. Applying our manual book in Hook Park, we may conclude 6 main characteristics of Hook Park. In the detail sections, we link the present management action with this plot, and the after section shows our suggestion of it, including insect control, groundwater control, and so on. We can take the old forest section as an example. The current mode are pruning, selective thinning, wildlife control, and let the dead trees decay. The most important in our additional suggestions are preserving mother trees and cultivate more fungi. We chose 3 experimental settings to test our management plan. Firstly, we define forest activities according to accessibility, tree density, and visual ethics. Although this plot may have multiple uses, we choose 3 of them: tourism, timber production, and replanting. Secondly, we are informed that a regional food park has 3 types of operation, including clear field, thinning, and unmanaged. Our site should include all of these operations. Thirdly, we related it to our intervention priority map. We prefer to choose those in the first 2 phases, which are urgently in need to be managed. And then we can come to our final 3 sites.
Using our new grant assessment, we analyze those 3 separately, and each would have its own improvement direction. 9F, as the wood production area, would focus on the changes in timber usage. Therefore, the timber will be used for furniture or installation making instead of biochips to absorb more carbon. As for the timber production, we use simulation to help us decide on thinning options. We have 4 types of circles to present the carbon sequestration. On the right, there are 2 charts. One shows the effective of giving back, and the other shows how much we're taking from the forest. If we only consider taking, like thinning 70% and doing nothing to give back, after 100 years, the scenario shows there aren't many old trees left, and the age diversity and the number of connections remain in the low range. After applying the idea of wood wide web, when we do 50% thinning but remain 10% trees as mother trees, the number of connections and the total amount of carbon will increase. The forest will also be healthier with the use of mycorrhizal product. After these actions, we compare how much we give and take, and find out that when timber production is needed, we can apply the 30% thinning in 9F. In this way, we can build a reciprocal relationship.
In 9F, we first select the mother tree and remain as throughout the thinning phases. The action and tools shown here are related to our manual book. New seedlings would replace the thin trees so that we could maximize protecting the underground connection. In these phases, AA master students could use the produced timber for their projects. In 12C, the majority of changes will be in tree species, as we advocating planting more native trees. 12C is supposed to have a clear fall and the replanting bold leaves. Compare those 2 ways. We choose to do the selective thinning to minimize the harm. Here shows how 12C will be replanted from a conifer plot to a broadleaf plot in the next 5 years. Firstly, we do the selective thinning and planting more native broadleaf seedlings. This action would repeat 3 times to fully change the tree species, as we can see how AA students and the surrounding residents could do to enjoy the forest and giving back simultaneously. Activities including forest courses, wildlife tracking, tree identifying, and etc. The particular changes in 13E are in forest dimensions, since more activities could happen here. For the phase 1, after judging from the satellite image, we select a passable path and thinning alongside the path, preparing for the phase 2. Here, we provide the passable activities, including thinning and some other protect actions like soil erosion control, fertilizing, and etc. In phase 2, we provide passable actions along the new path. After the ground pavement is prepared, the underground connection increased with the help of fungi, and visitors could do jogging and walking dogs here. In phase 3 is to have more open space and facilities. Here shows where are the 3 open spaces. In 13E, more facilities required activities and large gatherings could happen, like camping, barbecue installation making. Here shows the comparison of the before and after in each plot.
After all these testing plots, we will do assessment improvement in the whole park and see how it will link to its neighboring cities and forests, and to bring people back in the forest to build a reciprocal relationship. And then we can apply it to the whole UK.
The changes will take place where receiving subsidies currently, and then there will be more woodland managers interested in our proposal. The new grant assessment encourages planting native species and controlling invasive species. Broadleaves will account for most of the new planting area and the restocking area. We visualize the veteran tree density across UK after keeping the veteran trees and maintaining the habitat around them. Wood Wide Web connections would become even stronger, and biodiversity structure would also be enhanced. By protecting mother trees as well as grazing control by local people would promote the regeneration through woodland. In this way, saplings will grow naturally in the understory. Soil management, like applying organic matter and loosening soil, would help to increase the carbon sequestration underground. More forests will reach the standard of woodland carbon code, will contribute to the UK and reaching the net zero greenhouse gas emission. These protective actions may not only be done by woodland owners, but also by local people living near the woodland. The growing links between the forest and cities and the forests themselves are showing a better reciprocal relationship between forest and citizens. As a result, people go to the woodland more often and carry out more activities in the woodland, making the woodland a multi-dimensional forest, known as forest and on our website, here shows how we can give back to the forest in different scales.
That's all about our presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see which, I mean, Judith has raised her hand, but I don't know if it was from the previous time or.
The previous.
Ah.
Because again, I mean, this particular, I quite have this particular, I was again interested in what they are doing. I think the idea of giving back is a really good one. I think our culture from since the Renaissance so is that the humans want to dominate and exploit nature. I think we really need to change that, and I think this project is playing very much into this particular change, and so I welcome it. I think it's a very good idea. I have visited Hope Park. I think it's a very good place to start with, because already the AA has been active in that and has tried to give something back, in my understanding. So it's a good basis to do that. But again, to come back to Elena's notion of enclosure, one has to be very careful again that it shouldn't become an enclave and a sort of ideal world where you can realize all these idealistic objectives without them being repeatable in what's happening in the Amazon forest, for example, where we do the exact opposite. We give nothing back. We go on destroying it. So it would be interesting to see how this particular type of thinking and approach could be translated and transposed into places like the Amazon forest. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
think Dubravka.
So thank you again for this presentation, and I also really appreciate how you kind of take up this kind of another big, important kind of forest as a site of intervention, and how you connected these forests, how our relationship with the forests in Europe has been completely transformed, and how then in the world it has been transformed by the colonization. And then understanding how if AA has this forest, then this is a perfect site to really re-engage. I was wondering how much of the, and this is inspired by something that Judith was mentioning, like right to roam and all those different provisions of how forests can be used, that were enshrined by to a certain degree with the Magna Carta Manifesto, but before that, so how much you think that it's possible to tap into the some kind of a local vernacular knowledge from before enclosures and from before kind of capitalism changed completely the relation to the forest only as a resource provision. And I've noticed that you have been consulting a lot of which is really great, a lot of literature that is coming, like the work of Robin Wilmer. Now my brain froze, but like the indigenous, a lot of new kind of a lot of writing that is coming from indigenous perspectives of the relationship with the Robin Volkimmerer that is coming with this approach to the forest, also kind of understanding that the forests are much more complex systems, and that fungi and the networks of support that exist are not just the trees and separated from the rest. But how much is it possible, do you think, to also find ways of dealing when working with the forest which are much more tied to the really site where you are, or at least to the UK and British Isles, and not to necessarily do this kind of import of knowledge and way of looking at the forest which comes from other sites in the world?
Well, I think for the policy part, it's hard for us to answer this question because we don't know how it could be applied in the policy part. But we also not only provide options for people working in the forestry policy, but also the foresters. We apply the manual book, the management model. So for the we just want to shape people consider the forest not only a timber factory, but also we care more about the forest health itself. So I think it could happen if we shape their mind, they shape the way they look at the forest. So it could using our management model for the foresters.
I was wondering, what's building on these two last comments, like I think it's really interesting how you suggest that multiple voices can interact with forests and make a contribution and give back. So we imagine like the entrepreneur, but also the people, and the one that is taking advantage of tourism, like building a sort of business out of it, but also the users. So I was wondering how much of this is explored in your manual. I find it really interesting how you put this together, and you gave different frameworks, right? Like tourism and artisanal work and so on. So how do is this addressing different audiences, or who are you designing this for?
For the manual book is for the mostly for the general foresters, and we apply it in the whole park, so we see the different situation on different plot. So we give their suggestions and our our typical detailed models for each plot in Hook Park. Yeah.
So would it be possible to also think of a manual for people who are using this or who might be interested in like overlapping activities and so on?
Maybe our target is to encourage want the policy shaping by influence of us, so they can shape their way to give the subsidies. And this is the biggest influence that we can thought to influence the foresters.
Yeah, I think you meant the foresters in Hook Park, right? Because they are the
yes.
the client.
But I guess what Jeannette was suggesting is that if it is possible to fabricate guidelines or documents for, say, people that are bringing visitors or tourists, so that those people know what to do in the forest to help or to enjoy it more or whatever. So it's not just the forester that gets a booklet, but the tourist is not operator, but whoever is bringing people or encouraging people to just go there. So when you go to the forest and you know more of how to enjoy it and also contribute as a general member of the public.
Yeah, if the manual should be something more open so that you can really
Could be
achieve.
several manuals or
Yeah, so that you could really achieve this inclusivity or this idea that everybody can give back and be part of this process of regeneration. And also, of course, improve the sensibilization to the topic, etc.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in our last part of the presentation, our website shows the different scales that we can giving back to the forest, and from the global scale and to the individuals.
Okay, thanks. Billy?
Yeah, this is fantastic as well. I'll be quick because I have to jump off here in just a minute. But again, this was fantastic, and I think they're just like kind of two things I would maybe you could think about foregrounding a bit more as you wrap up, or putting a little bit more kind of emphasis on. One is that I think if you're going to point us towards kind of Indigenous and First Nations landscapes, you can also, which is great, I think, for this project, you should also maybe frame those as kind of our like last vestiges of truly like anti-capitalist landscape or territory at any real scale. So what you're proposing here, I think, is like starting to really, I think, implicitly think about what the political economic formulation would be for taking forestry and timber out of like the commodification process. Although you're not doing that entirely, I think you're starting to like think about what a wedge would be towards that. So anyways, I would make that connection a bit more explicit. And then the other is that I think it's mentioned here in one of the icons, and I can't remember because we were looking through pretty quickly, and I viewed the sites last night pretty late. So apologies if I missed this or forgot. But I think, you know, even though it often makes a lot of folks uncomfortable, thinking about like the role hunting plays in all of this kind of work is also really important. As both like a cultural practice, but also like a way of thinking about what that political economic formulation or coalition might be, and also as a kind of ecosystem management. This has been one of the most like successful, you know, proposals or formulations in Appalachia in the US anyway, is thinking about both like the way that hunters as like a polity get brought into this conversation and also become ecosystem managers through just the act of hunting. And you know, I'm not like a hunter, so I feel weird saying we should focus a lot on that. I guess personally because I grew up in like the South, that's just like a thing I've been around for a long time. But again, just thinking about like the different ways you can start to stitch together enough people, enough communities, enough polities for this to become you know, the kind of proposal that gets realized. I think it's just that's one other way you could have kind of foregrounded it for us. And I see a little bit of it here, but yeah, otherwise, wonderful work.
Thank you.
I think the issue of the right of wrong and the hunting are actually things that are happening in Hook Park. There's right of way already in Hook Park, so in that way there was it wasn't, let's say, presented within the project, but that's already existing. No, and obviously it's something that needs to be taken into account in other projects around UK. This is a policy that needs to be expanded. The actual forester in Hook Park is a hunter, and he basically defined himself as the way you did, really, as a way to kind of manage the ecosystem. Not because there's, as you know, there's deers that nibble all the small trees around, and they use that as a technique, which also it's important, I guess. I mean, they've been also looking at that within the project. But one thing, and that's perhaps something that covers all the project, is and I found it very interesting, is this idea of decommodification, which is something that it's kind of difficult to address, no? Because I guess our mode of thinking is just wired now to everything be part of the market, and in many cases, there's these ideas that are emerging about a different type of economy that doesn't measure growth, that tries to understand other thriving parts of the human. And I think perhaps some of the projects, or all the projects, are trying to address that. And they may seem in some cases idealistic, but I think they are not. They're actually more achievable than before, no? And crisis like the COVID one makes it more obvious that these are things that needs to happen, So yeah, so I think it's something that we've been as a program, trying to emphasize, and I hope those ideas can be further developed. And obviously, we welcome all your comments and all your wonderful ideas to move this forward.
I think if there are no more comments, I think. Yeah.
I didn't know whether there were any comments or not. I just.
Elena.
Yeah, sorry.
The raised hand. I thought. Okay.
Okay.
You have to learn these things.
Yeah, I think. Maybe I'll just start with saying, politics starts at home, right? And I think what's interesting about this, I almost just zoomed out a bit because, there's a certain expectation that, one starts at the scale of the woodland and then you join the woodlands together and then you get to the planetary scale. Yeah? And I just wanted to almost suspend my own assumptions about that very linear process of how we see scale when we consider the very tactical and I guess ambitious potentials of all of these proposals that you've put forward. So I was wondering what would happen if we stick with this one woodland. And if instead of just looking at the woodland and mentioning that there's an institution on it and then almost forgetting about the institution and going straight to the fungi and the sapling and the mother tree, is maybe understand how your project actually shows us that perhaps the role of institutions, whether they're tertiary institutions, primary, secondary, or other training facilities embedded in situ on site, are crucial participants in these reciprocal relationships that you describe. And in fact, this helped me understand that, this forest that you've drawn doesn't have a boundary of a solid white line. But if we take, the Appalachian example that William referred to, and McHarg's drawings of it, I think it was McHarg, I can't remember, one of the landscape fathers, and actually understand how even this woodland fits within the metabolism of the AA as an institution itself, and the connections that the institution has to other woodlands across the entire globe through its student networks, then it's interesting to see that perhaps this manual, these ideas that you've actually revealed through your project might travel even further if you build those kind of personal networks of exchange of ideas that you start to connect yourself. So I guess a lot of these projects don't necessarily only speak to UK policy of regenerating old growth woodland, because there's a difference between woodlands and plantations here, which I think you need to clarify in your written document, and that you're looking at woodlands and not plantations, and how some of these ideas in your manual exactly might connect to other sites with other tertiary institutions or other AA affiliations in other parts of the world. So I really think that what you've come up with is a charter of the forest. And again, Dubravka, I'm referring to your Magna Carta, the Charter of the Forest, but for the AA and its affiliations, and its confederation of other alliances it might be able to unleash beyond just the UK policy on woodlands. I don't know, I'm just throwing it in there as a way of kind of a provocation again, to help situate your projects beyond the kind of nested scalar index that we've kind of use as a kind of default setting, which is fine. I mean, yes, let's go there, but I think we can think laterally as well, and more tactically in terms of what our institutions allow us to do and how much ground they allow us to cover at pace, which is what we really need to do in these conditions we live in.
Yeah, and I think what like, just if I can jump in briefly, because I also have to peel off rather soon. I think that this is really one of, I mean, all of the projects, what I think are really great is because they really open up a field of practice for you when you pass your final exam and then you get out there. And they are not just the final project, and that they complicate scales, and that sometimes when you are still, because you're still at school, you feel that you have to, at the end, line up your project. Though I think that at the unit you're doing as teachers, you're doing also a wonderful job of complicating this kind of linear progression of scales. It's good to unlearn the scales in this way that we are, but to still think in this entanglement that go beyond. And just as an advice for this large project, Natasha Myers has been developing a really interesting, she's I think, Montreal-based professor. She's been developing what she calls a plant-human relationship as a potentially political relationship. And I think that this and also understanding that forest in itself, even without humans, is a complex institutional mechanism in its own right. And then understanding that, for example, hunters, and at least in Yugoslavia, or the territory that used to be Yugoslavia, play a really important role. Hunting associations play a really important role in supporting ecosystem and forests, and not just kind of hunting, and not just keeping under control certain populations of certain animals. To really, if you break out of this necessity to break things down to the scale and really map who is all connected to this specific forest. And Elena, you provided this beautiful opening towards the confederation and using AA as a way to add these relations. This will add so much more nuance to your project, which doesn't like nuance, but it can build on this really specificity that you can draw out of this particular form.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dubravka. Thank you, everyone. I don't know if there is any more comments. And if not, no. Well, we don't want to keep you long. Yes.
And good luck for your week of work.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us and for spending some time. I mean, we really appreciate the comments, the few moments we have to hear about the outer world of landscape urbanism, at least at the AA. So it's always great to hear what you have to say about what we do and what the students do, especially. So that's something that for us is very important. Yeah. And thank you to the students, because it's been a difficult time, obviously, for them being isolated, quarantine in their own places, and especially because we demand a lot of them in our tutorials, but also because many of the projects requires a lot of interaction with all these stakeholders, that came up in many of the conversations. So it's something that obviously they couldn't make it happen. They managed to have some email conversations, etc. But yeah, as much as they could, and we hope that they learn all these things and they kind of continue at least with some of these ideas, in their own path. Obviously, we're waiting for the final submission, so this is not the end. There's still some road to go, and especially for Nandita, that needs to go to the next term.
But I think what is great, because Alfredo, sorry for jumping in, that we all forgot that these projects were done in these extremely difficult circumstances in which you could not rely on peer learning as much as you can, because which is the most crucial part of being a part of this type of teaching, in which you are constantly in an environment with people, and just the fact that none of us at a single point kind of commented upon really shows how much you really were able to work together, and to actually do this teamwork, as each of the projects were teamwork and not just one student project.
I would like to support these comments, and really indeed it must have been really tough for both sides, for the teachers as well as for the students, to suddenly adjust to this quite exceptional situation. And I feel it, of course, very frustrating not to be with you in one room and have a proper interaction, because we are basically human animals. So I miss that very much. And I feel it's very much second best, very well done. I mean, I'm very glad that I could see you at least on screen and get some kind of feel of where the program is going and what the students are participating, contributing to it, also what we are all getting out of it. And I think, so I hope that we can continue one day face to face, but in the meantime, so really congratulations. I think the quality of the work is very good as usual.
Yeah, so thanks all the juries, and again, all the students for the hard work. It's been actually quite surprising to see how much they've pressed on the accelerator lately, and how well they've managed to put together what we believed a couple of weeks ago was a bit of a, oh my God, that's too much information. But I have to say, very well done generally. So congratulations from that side. And let's see how the book, well, not the books, because this year I don't know if we're going to have physical books or it's going to be all digital. But let's see how it comes out. So get some rest and then just keep on working until the last minute, well, or at least until we have to submit. So thanks a lot for that. Yeah,
thank you very much, and see you soon. We'll send you a message just to clarify that. Have some rest.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.